Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, February 9th, 2016. Gung Hee Fat Choi, start of the Chinese New Year, the Year of the Monkey, which is oddly appropriate given that it's an election year here in the United States. Speaking of which, obviously today is the primary in New Hampshire. And earlier today, Fox News was already premiering its graphics declaring who had won and was called on it by INFOWARS. And so they took that down. And I understand from production you got to have the graphics ready to go, and if, you have to have a graphic to slug in there even if you don't have the real one. But as of the last time I checked, based on a few New Hampshire towns that have a tradition of having their primary right at midnight so they can report the first in the nation, Fox News is reporting a three-way tie in the GOP primary between Trump, Rubio, and Kasich. And we're only talking like a handful of votes, so it's really not significant. What is significant is that they're also reporting Sanders is ahead of Hillary almost 2-1. Go Sanders, or down with Hillary, whichever your point of view happens to be. Now, at this point, everybody is looking at the polls going into this primary. Trump and Sanders are so far ahead that, barring the unexpected, it does look like Trump and Sanders are going to be winning, and on the GOP side, it's more of a race for who's in second than anything else. The final WMUR Republican poll had Trump at 31%, Marco Rubio at 17%, Ted Cruz at 14%. And as we head on to the actual main show of the primary, which will be, they'll start reporting results about the same time we're ending our show today. And there's kind of an interesting little quirk in the New Hampshire primary because voters who aren't actually registered with either party, which is 40% of the state's electorate, which tells you how disgusted they are with the whole thing, they can basically show up and decide at the last second whether they want to vote in the GOP primary or the Democratic primary. And so this may provide for some interesting drama. Early today, I was watching on Fox News how they were talking about how Jeb Bush is going to pick up momentum. He is going to, he's calling for a race reset in the New Hampshire primary. We're going to surprise people, and we're going to be going here. Oh, and by the way, Trump is probably going to win, but that's no big deal. And the bias for anybody but Trump is really there, and of course, people are on the lookout. They're on the guard for massive election fraud. In fact, we just put up yet another article. This is a big issue this year. Americans understand our elections are not honest. And keeping that awareness before the American public, of course, is going to act like a deterrent. Because people who are engaging in election fraud on a scale necessary to overcome double-digit deficits run the risk of being exposed and caught at it. And that's not going to go down very well with the voters. It delegitimizes the entire process, and with it the federal government. Now, Jeb Bush, as part of his reset, has decided he's going to get his older brother, George W. Bush, to go on out and stump for him. And a lot of people, including yours truly, are saying, I don't think this is going to work. We all remember George W. Bush, and very few of us outside of Wall Street and the military-industrial complex have a positive recollection of him. In fact, there's an article over here in Reader-Supported News saying the Bush campaign believes it can finish strong by reminding voters of Jeb's connection to a man who left the nation in smoldering ruins. Let's not sugarcoat it. Tell them how you really feel. And Jeb Bush is already out there campaigning on a preemptive military strike against North Korea. We're going to have more wars. Wars are fun. Wars are great as long as you pay for them and your kids die in them. But we love war as long as we don't have to go. And I don't think that's really going to sit too well with the people in New Hampshire. A lot of veterans in New Hampshire. And remember, veterans by and large understand what war is. And they're not really all that hot and bothered to get into it again. In fact, one of the graphics that's floating around the net right now, and we used it on the front page of What Really Happened, has to do with a comparison between President Eisenhower, who came back from leading the forces in Europe during World War II to become one of our most anti-war presidents. And he said, I'm opposed to war because I've been there. I've seen it. Contrasting that with Ted Cruz saying, well, we don't know if sand can glow in the dark, but we're going to find out. Ha, 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 ha. Now then, over in the Democratic side, specifically Hillary's camp, in the category of really, really bad timing, Hillary just got some really bad news in the form of the FBI officially acknowledging, confirming, there is a formal federal criminal investigation into former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's use of the private email server. And behind that, of course, is that question I have been asking and will continue to ask for as long as I can. Was Hillary Clinton repeating the 1996 Chinagate scandal, selling U.S. secrets to foreign governments using her weak email server, and collecting and laundering the payments through her charitable, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more foundation? Now, in New Hampshire, Sanders is double digits lead against Hillary. Nationally, it's now a tie. Sanders and Clinton are neck and neck, a dead heat. And I don't think it's because people like Bernie Sanders so much as people are just disgusted with Hillary Clinton. The Democrats are anybody but Hillary. We're still hearing talk about dragging Kerry in to take her place, because she's not going to make it all the way to November. Story coming out of Natural News about how Hillary Clinton is a big supporter of Big Pharma. She gets a lot of money from them. She's against legalizing marijuana. Don't want you to grow anything in your own garden to treat you. If you want to be mellow and tranquilized, you go to a doctor and you spend money and get a note, and then you go to the drugstore and you spend more money and you get the pills. Don't you dare grow your own medication in your backyard, because we can't make money off of that. Now, there's still a huge question about these speeches that Hillary Clinton made to Goldman Sachs, for which she was paid a huge amount of money. This is all being kept secret. Hillary says she won't release transcripts, what she said to them that would justify that kind of money per speech. But one of the people who was there publicly said that Hillary sounded more like a Goldman Sachs managing director than anybody else, and spoke glowingly of the wonderful work that Goldman Sachs is doing. Remember Lloyd Blankfein was out there saying, we're doing God's work when we take away your homes from you. All right, we're going to start grabbing some phone calls here. Doug in Tennessee, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, good afternoon, Mike. Aloha.
Aloha.
Well, I'm calling about Donald Trump's calling for the reimposition of waterboarding, and he said on Meet the Press Sunday that he would bring back waterboarding and go a whole lot further. And then to rationalize torture, he said he invoked Islamic terrorism and the 9/11 attacks.
Well, I've heard all about that, and, again, this is a demonstration of something I've been saying about Donald Trump, that he's actually very politically naive, because he is an outsider. He's as naive coming into the presidency as Jimmy Carter was, and too much of his worldview is shaped by what he's seen on the TV network news, and he needs to pull back from that, or he's going to get lured into a trap. Anyway, Doug, thanks a lot. We got to take a break for commercials here, so we're going to let you go at this particular point. Another little scandal. Swiss bank UBS, one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world, Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State intervened to help it with the IRS. And after that, the bank paid Bill Clinton $1.5 million for speeches. We'll be right back after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back and grab a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, I like Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, but it's always that buyer's remorse, no money back guarantee thing you always got to worry about.
Well, like I said, I don't agree with everything Donald Trump says, and I think he's dangerously naive about what's going on in politics, because he comes out of the world of business, which has a very different set of rules by which everybody plays. But he's an outsider, and he's going to shake up the system, and he's going to break the lock that the current establishment politicians have. And that, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah, because the only problem I have is if he gets in and he doesn't do anything for us, do you think it's over for us little people?
Well, I have to be very honest. I mean, unless there's a complete scrub out of the Congress as well this election season, I don't know that there's that much Trump can do. The best that is going to be said is, again, he's got his own money. He can't be bought. Nobody's going to be able to tell him what to do. And that is at least going to slow the destruction a little bit. But at this point, I don't think ultimately in the long run the United States can be saved. I think it's heading for a great humbling, is a good way to describe it.
Yeah, we are, Mike. We are entering a phase where the end of Rome. You know, it's like I fear. I don't know if we'll make it by the end of the year, but I fear like the neocons are going to infiltrate him just like they infiltrated every other president. It's really bad now with the neocons and the State Department and the money junkies in there, and it's just they really muffed up a lot of stuff. And
they really have, and again that's why so many people are scratching their heads about why Jeb is bringing W onto the campaign trail with him. It's as ill-considered and delusional as Hillary bringing Bill Clinton onto her campaign. You know, I mean, apparently they don't understand that ordinary Americans know what's been going on behind the scenes, and that the White House is not supposed to be an hereditary office passed off between two dynastic ruling families.
Well, Jeb Bush reminds me of Junior from Smoking the Bandit. Help me, Daddy, and he brings out his mother, and I'm like, oh, my God.
Well, you know, every time I look at Jeb Bush, he's got that deer in the headlights expression on his face, you know, just standing there in the middle of the highway, and the truck's bearing down on him, and he's going, hit the air brakes, Chester, hit the air brakes.
And he's supposed to be the brighter one of the brothers. My God.
He's a thin shadow to Daddy. You know, I did not agree with George Herbert Walker Bush, but at least there was a guy that you knew you could respect for his abilities, even if you didn't agree with his agendas. W was a nepot, and Jeb is another nepot as well.
And, Mike, real quick on John Kerry, if he has a twin brother, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. This guy is walking a thin line between good and bad cop, and it's over there. The Russians beat the terrorists, our terrorists, and then it's game over there. And well,
that's why they're now moving on to Libya so that they can prove how butch they are, but that's starting to crumble as well. You know, the unfortunate reality is this U.S. agenda to conquer the Middle East and reimpose Bretton Woods and the petrodollar, it has failed. Unfortunately, our leadership understands if they just quit, a lot of them are looking at war crimes trials. The tribunal over in Kuala Lumpur has already said Tony Blair and George W. Bush are guilty of war crimes for what they did in Iraq and during their terms in office. And so their attitude is, well, we have to keep going and we have to win or we're in big trouble, and it doesn't matter how many millions of other people's children have to die to protect our own selfish little hides.
Not just millions of people die. What about the millions of refugees, the millions injured, the millions of trillions of dollars in damage? These people are psychopaths and sociopaths, like Gerald Celente said. And
They are. And that is exactly why when this country was set up, the Founding Fathers diffused power and authority across all of the country. They didn't want a single office that held any significant amount of power because they understood it would be a target for very, very bad people. The curse of all political power is that it attracts the very sort of individual who should never be allowed to have it.
Mike, did you see Putin with the Bahrain king? He got a sword and he gave the king a thoroughbred horse. So things are changing. There's a new world order coming from an old world order, and that's just the way things are going to be.
As the U.S. collapses, these other nations can, it's reasonable. They're going to step in to fill that vacuum. Putin, Russia and China are out there making peace through commerce. They're making deals. All the U.S. knows how to do is make war. We've abandoned our manufacturing. We've destroyed our own agriculture with the GMO experiment. The only thing holding up the U.S. right now is forcing the world to use the U.S. dollar and charging them interest on it.
That's why we're all left, Mike. We're the Rome 2.0. It's a welfare and a warfare state, and it's sad to say, but people need to realize that's what it is.
That's exactly what it is, and like I said, we're heading for a great humbling. Thanks a lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go, getting on back here. As you know, Hillary is trying to dodge questions about all these very highly paid speeches she's making for these Wall Street financial firms. She's trying to say, well, Goldman Sachs just offered her, $225,000 for a speech. But as it turns out, that's what Hillary asks from everybody. She will not do a speech for any less than $225,000. And on WhatReallyHappened.com, we have a link to an article, the full list of everybody on Wall Street who forked over $225,000 or more for a Hillary speech. It is a very, very long list. Now, nobody pays that kind of money for a speech. It's a payoff. It's like when somebody gets a book deal with like an $11 million advance. The book isn't going to sell. The speeches aren't that interesting. This is a legal way of paying somebody off for a favor they did. And the Clintons have just made out like bandits on these so-called paid-for speeches. Now, article out of Investment Watch blog, and this is really kind of laying down what's going on. Hillary Clinton has trust issues. New Hampshire voters don't believe her. Actually, hardly anybody in the country believes her. She's been caught in too many lies. What is really alarming about Hillary's supporters, most of them are like these fanatical militant feminists. They don't care if Hillary is a liar. They don't care if Hillary is a traitor. They want Hillary in there because they want to prove that women can be president, and they don't care what else might happen to the country. They're just caught. It's a personality cult. Hillary is running her campaign as a personality cult, and that is a very, very dangerous type of leader to allow into power in a country. Because people who follow in a personality cult, they don't think. Their brains are disconnected. They just worship the leader. I will do whatever you tell me. Murder the White House deputy counsel and dump him in Fort Marcy Park. No problem. I'll do that on my lunch break. We've got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're going to go... Oh, I thought we had a phone call there. All right. Now then. Politico is reporting, and by the way, the Clinton campaign is already denying this, but Politico is reporting that the Clintons are considering a major staff shakeup after New Hampshire. One Democrat is saying the Clintons are not happy and have been letting us all know that. And if you remember reading about how Hillary treated the White House staff and the Secret Service, why would anybody want to work for them, especially for free? But of course, Clinton is blaming her staff in order not to blame herself. What's going on is all the scandals have caught up with her. All the doubts, all the mistrust, all the dead bodies, it's all caught up with her. But it's obviously the staff is to blame. They're not doing it well enough. We've got to, they're just frothing at the mouth here. So Hillary's out there saying, you get waterboarded, you flogged, you beheaded. Now, over in Iowa, interestingly enough, the state's Democratic Party is refusing to release the final raw vote totals for Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Their excuse is that's not how we do things over there. From which I think we can deduce that Sanders may have actually won Iowa. And the Iowa Democrats are trying to keep that out of the news at least until after the polls close in New Hampshire. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Scott in Wisconsin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, you remember me?
Yeah, I remember you.
I used to bother you over a year ago.
Yeah, I remember you. I remember the voice, certainly. What's on your mind?
Hey, yeah, Michael, I got to credit you for you waking it up. I just got a message to the American people. I mean, if you're not prepared by now, it's really sad. I'm talking about toothpaste for your dentals in case when the crash is coming. I believe it's coming this year. You can only keep up Cinderella dancing on the ice so long. And I appreciate you reaching out to the truth across this nation about these headhunters that are destroying America. And I'll tell you right now, people better pack their rice sacks, get their beans ready, and make sure they got their dentals clean, because you can die from a bad tooth. Because the rest of this year, Michael, is going to be horrible. And I just want to, I'm not trying to scare nobody, Michael, but you can see, if you can see through the big matrix as you have opened your eyes, we're in trouble, big trouble as this year goes on.
I mean, it's a mixed bag of blessings coming to us. Remember the very, very opening of A Tale of Two Cities? It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. That's where we are. There's a lot of hardship on the horizon, but there's also going to be dramatic, dynamic changes that are, in the long run, going to be good for the American people, I think. Okay?
Well, I think that you gotta, I'm a humble man, Michael, and I have hope. I always have hope. But the thing is you gotta make it through that bad time. And there's two words that I'll end this with, Mike, is that the panicked people will be in trouble, but the humble people will survive. Thank you for taking my call, Mike.
You got it, Scott. We'll talk to you later on. Thank you for the phone call. Now then, story coming out of RINF.com, the meaning behind the Sanders surge. And we're seeing a lot of pundits, if you will, writers, both in the corporate media and the independent media, trying to explain Sanders' come-from-behind success. He was 30 points down only a few months ago. And now he's in a dead heat with Hillary Clinton. And they're trying to frame this in terms of what is Sanders' attraction. And they're doing this because what they don't want to talk about is Hillary's self-destruct. Because they can't talk about Hillary's self-destruct without getting into the issues why. The cattle futures trade, travel office firings, Whitewater, Castle Grande, Flowerwood, the Chinagate scandal and its possible reprise today. So they're trying to frame this solely in terms of Sanders' rise, but it isn't. It's Hillary's decline. Now, Donald Trump was out there on an interview where he's coming on out and saying this claimed 4.9% unemployment is a phony number. Same thing we've been saying on this show all along. And he's joking that one of the reasons that all of his sports venues that he's renting for his rallies are full is because people don't have jobs to go to. And it is a little bit of a cruel jest, but it's absolutely true. Absolutely true. Now, despite the huge leads currently being enjoyed by Trump and Sanders in the polls, there is that issue of possible vote fraud. And we put up a couple of articles on WhatReallyHappened.com. One of them is a video showing how easy it is to hack these election machines. There are no safeguards whatsoever. They're wide open. Bev Harris, again over at blackboxvoting.org, actually found 12 different ways. The Diebold Election Systems, which was then bought out by ENS, which was then bought out by Premier Election Systems, but it's still the same hardware and the same people. 12 different ways you can get into this system and change the results of an election, leaving no trace whatsoever. So we're seeing all these articles all over the place, and that's a good thing. New Hampshire election fraud prediction. Because we need to keep America alert that these things are a reality of political life and have been for quite some time. And it's epidemic. These electronic machines were designed to make it easier to rig elections. And this article, New Hampshire election fraud prediction, is talking about just how risky it is to try and use election fraud to erase a double-digit lead, especially when the voters are suspicious. They're on alert. They're watching for something to be odd. Are they willing to take the risk? Part of the problem, of course, is that anytime anybody is caught engaging in election fraud, nothing happens to them. The candidates can tell their underlings, yeah, go ahead, do whatever it takes here, because if they get caught, nothing happens. The U.S. government does not prosecute election fraud. It just isn't. That should be one of the highest, most serious crimes, stealing an election. In the blueprint for the new America, the way we're setting it up is, if a candidate's campaign is caught cheating, the candidate is immediately disqualified from the race, because if they can't manage their own staff and keep them in compliance with the law, then by default, they're unqualified to run a nation. Now, you remember back in Iowa, there was this bogus letter that the Ted Cruz campaign sent out that looked like an official document and was basically, we're going to tell your friends and neighbors whether you voted or not and who you voted for, to try and shame them into voting for Ted Cruz. And Donald Trump is saying that, this may have been one of the ways that Ted Cruz was able, to win in Iowa. And the letter that was sent out contained false statements. The state of Iowa had to stand up and say, no, we have nothing to do with this. This isn't coming from us. There's been another one in New Hampshire. And it shows up, and the envelope says important tax documents inside. So, of course, people are going to rip it open. And in there's another one of these letters, and nobody knows where it came from. They've covered their trail this time. But it's out there saying, you have to get out there and you have to vote. All very underhand. This is a dirty, dirty campaign, and this is only the first of the primaries. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, interesting article came out of the Telegraph over in Great Britain, New Hampshire primary. Why is America so angry with its politicians? Is this a trick question, or are they really that out of touch over at the Telegraph? Americans have a lot of reasons to be very angry with politicians, especially over the last 2 decades. And one of the reasons Sanders is popular is he's seen as less of an insider establishment than the establishment, and Trump's popularity is based on the fact that he's a complete outsider. He's an absolute complete outsider. Americans want the old guard out. Absolutely. And I'm predicting that there will be a tremendous anti-incumbency, anti-establishment, anti-friend of Israel fever sweeping the nation this election season. The vote riggers won't be able to keep up with it. Now, over in Syria, things, as that caller indicated, they're all but over. Aleppo is the last stronghold of the U.S.-backed terrorists, and Syria, protected by Russian air cover, is getting ready to basically clean their clocks. And so over at the New York Times, they're out there just screaming about how this is all Russia's fault. Russia's just spoiled everything for everybody, which is actually kind of true. Because the real goal for the last 5 years from the United States is to get Bashar al-Assad out of Damascus and replace him with a pliant, obedient puppet regime, and they have failed. And so now the finger pointing comes. And just like Hillary is blaming her staff for her own failings, the New York Times wants to scapegoat Russia for the failure of U.S. foreign policy, which was pretty much brain dead to begin with. This whole idea of we're going to go out and wage endless war against the rest of the world and they'll just sit there and take it. All goes back to that neocon website organization, the Project for the New American Century, which set as policy, we're a superpower, we might as well act like it. And nobody did an actual analysis over the long term of whether the U.S. military or economy had the resilience to complete the plan, because it didn't. Now, sources are revealing that Riyadh is already holding training courses for 150,000 Saudi, Sudanese, Egyptian, and Jordanian mercenary forces getting ready to invade Syria. Now, Iran is out there saying Saudi's willingness to invade Syria reflects the U.S. failure. Actually, Iran has it wrong. What's going on is the U.S. government understands that you, the American people, are sick and tired of war. You're sick and tired of paying for it. You're sick and tired of seeing your kids come back in wheelchairs or metal boxes, and you've had enough. So the U.S. is now using Saudi Arabia as a proxy. We're not killing all those people in Yemen. Saudi Arabia is doing it. We've got nothing whatsoever to do with this. Even though, obviously, we hope Saudi Arabia will teach those Yemenite people not to kick out their U.S. puppet rulers. And now they're going to do the same thing in Syria. oh, it's Turkey and Saudi Arabia that's mounted a ground invasion in Syria. We had nothing to do with it. You see how the scam works? Now, there's another article came out of Politico. Past American appeals to Russia haven't stopped it from aggressively escalating its support for the Syrian regime. Russians lay siege to Obama's Syria strategy. You say, Obama had a strategy. That's a good thing. Russia is getting in the way of our strategy. And again, what they're ignoring is the fact that Russia is in Syria at the request of the legitimate, recognized government of Syria. The U.S. does not have Syria's permission to be doing anything inside Syria. So who's the aggressor? Who is it who is acting in contravention of international law? Now, the Saudi-backed Syrian opposition, everybody's got their puppets on the ground in there, is saying a precondition for any more peace talks is that Russia stop bombing ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which tells you who the Saudis are really working for. They want Russia to stop bombing the U.S.-backed terror groups so the U.S. can go back into Syria pretending to go after ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but bombing Syria's infrastructure. That's what's going on. Meanwhile, Angela Merkel, who's now in thrash mode in her own government, is out there saying that the reason the Syrian peace talks failed, it's because of the refugees. It's all these refugees have confused the issue here. And of course, Russia's to blame here as well. Up in Switzerland, there was a Kurdish demonstration in front of the Turkish consulate that had to be driven back with tear gas and rubber bullets. The whole world's going crazy. Down in Egypt, their foreign minister is saying that there should not be a new intervention into Libya. It should wait until a Libyan government is formed and requests such assistance. Now, that's a very important statement because, again, the U.S. is going into all these countries without the permission of the indigenous government. But Libya already has two governments. The first is the one the Libyan people set up for themselves. In other words, the ones being bombed. And the second government is the puppet regime being forced on them by the United States, meaning the ones dropping the bombs. Okay, we're getting some power dips here, so if I go silent all of a sudden, you'll know why. Story coming out of WSWS.org. Top U.S. general confirms Pentagon is planning for a permanent combat role in Afghanistan. They're deploying more U.S. troops in front-line combat roles, boots on the ground, and stepped-up airstrikes. Remember when they said, I remember when Obama was running back in 2008, and he said, the first thing I'm going to do is end the wars and bring our kids home. Now they're sending more in there. Why? Well, they got to protect that gas pipeline, which was the original reason for invading Afghanistan, and they got to protect that opium. Oh, the American drug lords, they need that supply of opium. Anyway, over in Great Britain, more and more we are seeing that whereas David Cameron and some of his globalist cohorts are still pushing for a merger with the European Union, the British people and much of the British government are now turning away from it. And they're saying that there is clearly a shift towards leaving the EU completely when the referendum happens. I'm sure David Cameron is already on the phone to American election machine companies saying, we got to get a bunch of those in here. You know, what we did, they caught us rigging the vote up at Scotland for the independence referendum. We need the electronic machines to be able to steal elections without being detected. Over in Israel, 3 Arab members of the Knesset have been suspended from the Knesset for being Arabs, essentially. They met with families of Palestinians who are trying to get their land back from the illegal settlements, and for that one meeting alone, they've been kicked out of the Knesset. Now, a senior Israeli rabbi is out there saying Tel Aviv should execute Palestinians instead of arresting them and leave no one alive in order to establish safety in the occupied Palestinian territories. He's calling for a genocide. Not a word from America's corporate TV networks, but I think we can all agree if some Palestinian or imam called for the murder of all Jews, there would be a very loud reaction. But it's just Palestinians. We don't care about them, and you shouldn't care about them, really. You shouldn't care about them at all. You know, if you care about the Palestinians, then you're just being a dirty, filthy anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens. So, okay, there's an interesting article that you ought to take a look at. It's at WhatReallyHappened.com. It's from Blacklisted News. Dangerous speech. Would the founders be considered domestic extremists today? And it basically goes down some of the statements made by the founding fathers, that if you were to repeat them today without saying this is from George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, you could be arrested. And that shows you just how far this nation has declined from that magnificent creation that we once had as a government and a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people. And by the way, Bill Clinton, that's Abraham Lincoln. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We got 2 callers waiting right now. Before we get to them, breaking story. The Prime Minister of Turkey has declared their intention to protect Aleppo. And for those of you not up on your geography, Aleppo is not in Turkey, it's in Syria. It's the last stronghold of the hired mercenaries and U.S.-sponsored terror groups trying to kick out Assad. And Turkey is basically going back saying that they have an historical obligation to protect Aleppo dating back to World War I. I mean, they're really reaching for a justification to basically start a war with Syria. That's what they're trying to do, to come up with some excuse that people will say, oh, yes, Turkey has a right, to go in and bomb the heck out of Syria because of something that happened about 100 years ago. So, all right, let's grab ourselves a couple of phone calls here. Glenn in Pennsylvania, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. You mentioned that story about the U.S. permanent presence in Afghanistan. You know, it just made me think how I don't think the United States has fought a war against an existential threat to itself since the War of 1812.
Well, I think the Civil War would qualify.
Well, okay, but there, with the added element that there was foreign manipulation in there in the terms of the British involvement and Russia putting their navies on both our coasts to keep the British out of the way, and the net result of the Civil War is that it accrued far more power to the federal government than it was ever supposed to have. And then going on from there, but no sooner had the ink from the signature of Woodrow Wilson on the Federal Reserve Act dried, then we were taken into World War I, and then we had World War II, and then everything from Korea on has been police actions and other such things, and now we have these wars on this and wars on that. It seems to me the U.S. has long been, at least since the time of the Federal Reserve Act, been a mercenary entity for the globalists.
Oh, absolutely. No question about it.
Yeah. But I was raised with patriotism and all that kind of stuff. And
they don't want to tell you the war is all about getting a huge bunch of money because you might ask for a share of it, and they don't want to share. So they'll give you a little tiny medal, costs them about $2 to make in bulk, and that's it. That's your payment for going on out and making these people rich by conquest.
It's very disheartening for anyone who would like to be patriotic to realize that in order to be patriotic, you can't support what the manipulators.
Well, wait a minute. You have a very narrow definition of patriotism, and mine is a little bit different. You know, a patriot is loyal to his fellow citizens and his country at all times, and loyal to the government only when it deserves it.
I'm agreeing with that.
Okay.
I'm saying, but if you've been raised with the flag waving and the militarism, it's difficult to realize you have to divorce yourself from that and adhere to the principles, not the hoopla.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. I mean, it's very hard for Americans to, look in the mirror and realize we're the bad guys.
It is very hard, very hard. And now we see NATO has essentially been turned into this super mercenary entity. And this role with Turkey is just a manifestation of NATO functioning as a mercenary entity for the globalists now, too.
Well, NATO is being set up to be the vanguard against Russia itself Turkey and Saudi Arabia are being used as proxies to basically complete the next step of this plan, which is to change the government in Syria. And then, of course, once they've got Syria, they got to gin up a reason to go after Iran. But you know, this was all supposed to be over in 2008. It's gone on way too long. The American people are sick and tired of war. And worse, all of these countries the U.S. has regime changed or conquered are not accepting their servitude. They're kicking their U.S. puppets out. That's why the U.S. had to go back into Afghanistan, having to go back into Iraq, having to go back into Yemen, having to go back into Libya. Those pesky conquered provinces refused to stay conquered. And like that earlier caller said, this is a very marked parallel to the decline and fall of the Roman Empire.
Exactly. So, you know, we've had the megalomaniacs and the sociopaths trying to establish top-down oligarchical control of the whole world using all these proxy wars and that sort of thing. And at the national level, in each of these nations, we see people fitting the description you're talking about, being frustrated with it and tired of it. Even down in Mexico, the small village people, the people of the villages and towns in Mexico are arming themselves in the vigilante style against the drug cartels and that sort of thing. It's almost like the Magnificent Seven or something like that. You know? So in each nation, in each regional area, it's not just Americans, it's people realizing, hey, this isn't right, and we want local, regional, national sovereignty. We don't want to be controlled by a bunch of oligarchs at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, all governments decay into oligarchy and fascism, without exception.
Yeah.
You know, and
going through democracy on the way down. Democracy is a pre-tyranny state of affairs.
Well, democracy, when it gets hijacked by those election machines, is the handmaiden of tyranny. Anyway, Glenn, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we're going to take up Jesse in Ohio. Aloha, Jesse. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I was just at work sometimes. I put on some of your old shows when I'm working just for something to listen to. And you had a caller call in a couple months ago, Larry Pinckney. And I know a couple other people have called in.
Yes.
Really would like to see if you would schedule an interview or try to get an interview with him. I think you'd find him pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I'm going to have to track him down and get him back on the show. I didn't realize who he was when he called into the show, to be very honest.
Yeah. Well, if you'd heard him talk, he's got one of those unmistakable voices before. Or if you heard him before, you'd have to know who he was. And he was...
Okay, I will try and get him on, okay?
Yes, thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Okay, now, turning back to the dictatorship that is emergent in the United States of America, a federal appeals court ruled yesterday that it is not a violation of the Constitution for law enforcement to set up a camera on a public utility pole and record everything that you're doing for 10 weeks straight. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit said such warrantless recording is permitted because people have no reasonable expectation of privacy in video footage recorded by a camera that's outdoors. And I understand this is a gray area. But again, we're getting back to the issue that the government shouldn't be looking at you anywhere without probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation. So I disagree with the ruling of the court on this one. Now, over in Arizona, okay, they're striking a blow for liberty. The Arizona legislature is considering a bill that would ban the concept of a free speech zone on college campuses. House Bill 2615, introduced by State Representative Anthony Kern, would prohibit all colleges and universities in the state from designating any area of the campus as a free speech zone, and would further require that any such zones in existence be converted to a monument or a memorial. In other words, they're reasserting the First Amendment. You can talk about what you want to talk about anywhere on the campus. So good for Anthony Kern, and we hope that this bill will pass. This idea of a free speech zone is just nonsense. You know, you can say whatever you want as long as you're over here in this chicken wire cage where nobody can hear you. That's ridiculous. The First Amendment says you have a right to freedom of speech. You have a right to petition the government for redress of grievances. If you're locked in a free speech zone where they can't hear you, that's a violation of the Bill of Rights right there. Now we're seeing another story. This is over at the Daily Bell. About surveys are showing a shocking level of hatred of the government by the American people. This one was coming from a survey from the American Customer Satisfaction Index. And I understand where they're coming from on that one. Government is the most expensive thing you will ever buy. More expensive than your house, your children's college education, your medical bills, your car, all of it. Are you getting value for money? And the answer for the vast majority of the American people, the 99%, is no, we're not. We need a cash for clunkers program for the government. We take our big, inefficient, bloated government, we crunch it up at the junkyard, and we all get checks to buy a new, smaller, more efficient government. That's what we need in this country. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking on the Fox News feed here where they've got the banner headline on there, Hillary Clinton trying to prevent Sanders' victory in New Hampshire. They're not going into detail into just what methods Hillary is employing, obviously. And apparently they've also got this other one, Bill stumping for wife Hillary. Sometimes I wish we weren't married. I don't know what they're trying to say, but for somebody who looks at it casually, I don't think it's getting the message across that they intend to get across. And Bill may really feel that way, you know. And based on Bill's dating life, you know, I think we should all just, you know, follow Bill's advice. Anybody but Hillary. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Francis in Vancouver. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just wanted to say, you know, that the big story of the day is to see how flagrantly they cheat Donald Trump of his victory after, 4 or 5 months of leading the polls in New Hampshire. I'm thinking they're going to just totally cheat him, and they're going to stick maybe even Jeb Bush or Rubio in first place and just steal the election from him.
Well, could very well be. Like I said earlier today, Fox News was going on about how, you know, Jeb Bush was going to be gaining momentum from New Hampshire, and, you know, Jeb Bush is saying this is a reset, we're going to surprise everybody. I mean, they're almost telegraphing, you know, that they're going to try and steal the election. But, you know, given the fact that Jeb Bush is using George W. on his campaign and Hillary is taking Bill out on the campaign trail, these people are clearly oblivious to what's really going on out in the American heartland in terms of our awareness of what they're doing. They still believe fervently that they have succeeded in bamboozling us into thinking that they're really good people. And, you know, I mean, that's a dangerous disconnect. But then if you understand, all of these politicians are surrounded by these parasitic sycophants who are busy telling the candidate and the politician what they think the boss wants to hear rather than telling them what they really need to know. And we're seeing symptoms of that.
Well, the question I have is, like, what machines are they using to count the vote? Is this a Microsoft election machine they're using?
Well, no. New Hampshire is using the same optical ballot scan system that was featured in the HBO documentary Hacking Democracy. And they are wide open to fraud and failure, as is the absentee ballot system. And we've already heard that there's been a huge amount of absentee ballots sent in.
Wow.
The thing is, you know, if Trump is polling in double digits and Sanders is polling double digits and they reverse that, everybody in America is going to know what's going on. These people,
yeah, it'll be a laughing stock.
Well, more than that, it's going to delegitimize the elections itself and the federal government along with it. They're playing with fire, you know, because on the day when the American people are forced to confront the fact they have completely been shut out of the running of this country, you're going to see a lot of anger and fury start to surface.
Yeah, well, Trump nailed that at the last debate when they were all booing him, and he just pointed at the front row and said, you know, there's a lot of articles on this, like they've got Sheldon Adelson and Paul Singer and those guys, they all show up, and they're the guys in the audience. And there's no Trump people, it's all Jeb's people, and to listen to the audience, you think Jeb is the most popular guy in the country. Well,
yeah, the GOP leadership, they only gave Trump's people a few passes to be there. Most of the passes went to Jeb Bush's supporters. They're still pushing the dynastic ruling family, the Bushes or the Clintons, either one. And, you know, but again, you know, trying to force a Bush or a Clinton on us again this election could seriously make the American people as a whole view the federal government as completely delegitimized.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Mike. I just hope I'm wrong, and I hope it's not a rigged election, but I'm on the internet. I talk to a lot of people. I'm just getting the sense that you're gonna get robbed again, like in Iowa.
Yeah, but this, you know, stealing an election is okay when the public doesn't realize that's what happened. But if they steal the election this obviously now, everybody's going to know that's exactly what went down. And, that's going to start triggering some significant changes in our society. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Time to talk about the economy. The Asian markets got slammed last night. The Hang Seng was closed because of the Chinese New Year. The Nikkei lost more than 5% in a single day. And today the plunge protection team was busy trying to fight the force of gravity. Gravity won, but only by a slight margin, but it was a very, very dynamic day on the stock markets. What's really interesting is anybody who knows when the PPT is going to make a move, they can make a huge amount of money knowing when the dips and peaks are going to hit. It's all rigged. It's all crooked. The whole system from top to bottom is crooked. Fresh banking crisis fears send the FTSE to the lowest level since 2012. They're in serious trouble. And an article that we're seeing out of Zero Hedge. After the European bank bloodbath, is Canada next? Because Canada's in serious trouble. Their currency is losing value against the U.S. dollar, which in the winter is a problem because Canada has to import food from the United States. Because they're all covered with all that snow and ice that Al Gore kept insisting was a thing of the past. Now, Deutsche Bank is starting to shape up to be the new Lehman Brothers. They are carrying more than $75 trillion in derivatives exposure. And they're stuck with it. They can't just say, we've changed our mind. Here's your money back. Nobody's going to do that. That's why they're having to prop the stock markets up as long as they can. When there's a correction, many of these institutions are going to be insolvent overnight. They're going to default on their debts, and that's when the holders of the credit default swaps are going to start banging on those doors. Now, the story coming out of Investment Watch blog, countries are dumping U.S. assets, and Iran will not use the dollar for the oil trade at all. Now, there's this stabilization economic fund here in the United States. It's something that most people don't know about. And it's basically a huge pool of cash, and they're using it up, buying all these treasuries that everybody else is dumping. Remember when we heard Russia's dumping treasuries and China's dumping treasuries, and we're saying, who's dumb enough to buy these things in a treasury bubble? Well, actually, you're being forced to buy them. Because they're using tax money to buy back these treasury bonds, which may turn out to be completely and utterly worthless. Story coming out of investinghaven.com, a bullish gold price forecast for the coming 6 months. Gold is heading up. They can't keep that price suppressed any longer. Same thing with silver. There's huge demand out there. The paper contracts on gold are leveraged over 500, almost 600 to 1. That is an absolutely insane amount of leveraging. No other commodity market would be allowed to get away with that. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the economy, predatory economy especially. And over in Washington's blog, they've got an interesting article. Central banks intentionally impoverish their host countries to effect structural reforms, which is a polite way of saying changing the government, which then allow foreign interests to loot the land. It's a game they have been playing for 300 years. And now they're turning it against us. AIG, which you probably remember from the 2008 meltdown, is planning to exit from at least half of the hedge fund positions they currently hold because of the risk factor that's accumulating. Now, Sears has issued a warning that their earnings for the fourth quarter of last year are going to be a lot worse than expected because they had a really terrible holiday shopping season. And they're accelerating the pace at which they are closing their stores across America. Now, interestingly enough, Sears has relied very much on female shoppers aged 55 and older. But the demographics are changing, and most of these people are now saying they'd rather shop at Goodwill than at Sears, according to a recent survey. And one of the things, I used to be a big fan of Sears. The last time I bought a belt there, it behaved like it was made out of pressed cardboard, and it fell apart after just a couple of months. So I don't go back there anymore. There's another article out there. These 5 retailers are suffering in a changing retail world, and they're talking about Sears and Macy's and these others, talking about how, well, shoppers they're going more online, they're going to the small boutiques, and they're making all these excuses, and they're dodging the central issue, which is the number of Americans who actually have cash to go down to the stores and buy things is shrinking rapidly, because all the money is being sucked up to the 1%, and there simply are not enough of those 1%ers to keep the retail manufacturing economy ticking along. And it is rather amazing how hard the corporate media is working to reassure us that everything is just fine and explain away the collapsing economy around us in terms that do not lay the blame at wealth inequality, which is what's going on. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Chet in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I just heard a priceless definition for politicians that I think you'd enjoy.
Okay, lay it on me.
Politicians comes from the root word politics, which breaks down into poly, which means many, and ticks, which are blood-sucking parasites.
Yeah, I've heard that before, and it's absolutely bang spot on.
Okay, that's all I got. Thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. Okay, now let's talk about immigration. The refugee crisis spreading all over the place. We are now finding out that down in Turkey, Erdogan is using the refugees to extort money from Europe, saying that unless Europe gives him enough money to do what he wants to do, which at the moment appears to be declaring war on Syria, he's just going to start putting more of the refugees on buses and sending them up. It's blackmail. And he's saying, what are you going to do if I do that? What's Europe going to do? Just start killing the refugees at the border? You can't do that politically. So anyway, let's see. Now, here in the United States of America, the United States government, the finest government money can buy, has granted $750 million of Obamacare funds to hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are scratching your head over the fact that the illegal immigrants and the refugees seem to be getting a better deal from the U.S. government than you, the legal American citizen. It's almost like the government sees you as merely a walking wallet from which to take money to hand out for political gain. And that's actually not too far from the truth. That's how government sees you. You're livestock, you're a herd, you are there to have work product harvested, and they're going to tell you what to eat, what not to eat, what medicines you can take, what medicines you can't take. They treat you like their property, and they take your wealth, and they use it for their cronies and their political agendas. Over in Austria, the people are very angry because it turns out the refugees are being given a higher priority for hospital visits. In other words, Austrians who need to go to the hospital have to wait behind the refugees coming on in. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call from Dave in Hungary. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Great to hear from you. Just wanted to say there are a few European leaders who are standing up for their countries. I wish our own would do the same.
I agree.
Viktor Orban. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I was agreeing with you.
Yeah, Viktor Orban, who people here in Hungary don't like too much, and he is something of a kleptocrat, is nevertheless an avid nationalist. And this nonsense that Merkel has inflicted on her own country and some of the other European countries have done, the Hungarians are having absolutely none of. They put up razor wire on the Serbian border. There is still immigration, but it is very tightly controlled. And I gotta say, I have the utmost admiration for my hosts. There's absolutely nothing going on here in Hungary like we've seen in Germany, and the few isolated incidents that do occur, usually end very, very badly for the perpetrators. I think the Germans could take a lesson from the Hungarians.
Oh, yeah, there was a story came out of Russia the other day where some of their refugees tried to assault a woman and woke up in the hospital.
I have seen Hungarian soldiers brandish a few souvenirs. I won't go into details, but word gets around, and the dross and the parasite surge is avoiding the Hungarian border. Things are working here.
Yeah, and again, I think a big part of this shoving of all the refugees into Europe, bringing in the illegal immigrants to the United States, is all about trying to blur the human population together to destroy our sense of a regional, cultural, or historical identity. Same reason they went after the Confederate flag, so that we don't have the ability to stand up to the oligarchs.
It is a destruction of national and cultural identity, and it's been at work since 1913. But I don't want to expand on that. I just get labeled conspiracy theorist. But I absolutely agree with you. But a few countries are bucking the tide, and Hungary is one of them. I gotta say, I'm really proud to be here. I'm a biomedical scientist. I do cancer research.
Okay.
I really admire the Hungarians. They stand up for their own country. I wish we'd do the same.
It's starting to happen. I mean, the whole Pegida movement, all of this blend everybody together and sing Kumbaya has triggered a backlash of intense nationalistic fervor in all of these countries, including here in the United States of America, and that's absolutely not what the New World Order wants.
Absolutely. And as much as I distrust Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, I gotta say I'm encouraged to see the wellspring of nationalistic fervor they've tapped into. Although I wouldn't exactly call it nationalism in Bernie's case. Listen, I gotta let you go. One last thing. I called a while back. You promised to play the Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead when Hillary...
when she's finally dead and down and the stake is through her heart and they put the garlic all over her grave, I will definitely do that. Have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the immigrant crisis. I'm looking at the story out of TASS, where the number of migrants going through Russia's Murmansk region up in the Arctic has doubled just in the last 10 days. And they're trying to put these people up in hotels. But it is a major, major problem. And remember, German intelligence is saying some of these people are, in fact, members of these U.S.-sponsored terror groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra. Now, Daily Caller is reporting that Apollo Education Group, the company that owns the University of Phoenix, which is large but struggling, is being sold to private investors, led by a firm notable for its extensive ties to President Barack Obama's administration. Another little crony deal going on. Now, speaking of crony deals, the other day we were talking about how George Soros, who funds a lot of the anti-gun groups out there, actually himself owns stock in gun manufacturers, so that every time the gun grabbers say, we got to take your guns, and Americans run out and buy guns, George is making money. And it's the same scam the gangsters did during Prohibition. Anytime anybody talked about repealing Prohibition, the gangsters would fund the temperance movements, who often didn't know they were working for the gangsters. And they'd go on out and say, no, alcohol must be banned. And, of course, the gangsters made a lot more money off of illegal alcohol than legal alcohol. Then it came out that President Obama owns stock in some of these gun manufacturers through some of his pension funds. So he makes money. And now there's a whole list of these people coming on out. U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, a leading advocate of gun control, has $115,000 invested in an S fund, which has $196 million worth of stock in gun and ammo maker Vista Outdoor. Former U.S. Congresswoman Carolyn McCarthy, a gun control crusader, owned between $3,000 and $45,000 in exchange-traded funds with stakes in guns and ammo. Business is booming. So maybe they don't really want to disarm us. They want us to drive us to buy stuff they're making money off of. Now, over in Michigan, the petition to recall Michigan Governor Rick Snyder has been approved by the Board of State Canvassers Monday. So there's going to be a move to recall the governor, and they should do that. One of the state prosecutors in Michigan is saying that there could be manslaughter charges arising out of the way they handle Flint's water, because there are apparently some deaths attributable to the high toxic content and high lead content. Now, out in Los Angeles, we've been talking about that Porter Ranch gas leak. Huge amounts of methane going on out there. Now, according to Southern California Gas, they've been trying to drill what's called a relief well, which is they're trying to drill down below the break so that they can punch into it, load it up full of concrete, and seal it off, they hope. Maybe. It's something like 1.5 miles underground. So, who knows what's going to happen. But they're saying they're within 20 feet of being able to shut this thing off. But the damage has already been done. There's a new report that's coming on out from NN News saying that methane, when exposed to sunlight, can produce as a byproduct formaldehyde. And Southern California Gas knows that. When they're out there saying this is safe, it's harmless, nonsense. Formaldehyde is a carcinogen. It's a very toxic substance. My wife is incredibly sensitive to it. If she's exposed to any formaldehyde or formaldehyde precursors, she gets serious crippling joint pain. So, now let's get back on to the Indian Point reactor in New York, because they're very concerned about the alarming levels of radioactivity that is now being found in the groundwater around the Indian Point nuclear power plant. It's contaminated with tritium, which is a beta emitter, meaning if the water's on the outside of you, your skin is not enough to protect you from the radiation. Alpha radiation can't penetrate the epithelial layer. Beta can. Gamma's worst of all. Tritium is a beta emitter. It's got a half-life of 12.5 years. The only good news is it decays into non-radioactive helium. But basically the point of this article that came out of the Investment Watch blog, is saying that at this point, the average American, meaning you, has no excuse for not understanding the degree of decay suffered by our infrastructure. Our roads, bridges, dams are falling apart. Rail system is rusting. Power plants not reliable. Internet communication dubious. Much of this infrastructure has been used for far longer than its original constructed lifespan was intended. They'll reach the end of the lifespan of a nuclear reactor and they'll say, it's still working okay, we'll run it for another 10 years. And we're seeing an increasing incidence of failure, whether it's the Gulf oil disaster, WIP, Hanford, Indian Point, all the fracking leakages going on, Porter Ranch, all of it. Because we've been living in a wartime economy for 20 years now, where the government takes all the money they can away from you, and they give it to their cronies, they give it to the military-industrial complex, they give it to Israel, they give it to the illegal immigrants and the refugees, and they don't have anything left to spend on you because you don't count. Especially in an age of rigged elections, what you want and what you think about doesn't matter anymore to them. They're running this country like a business and spending money on the taxpayers. Well, that's just loss. We don't get anything back for it, which shows how short-sighted they are. Because if we don't have a solid infrastructure, if we don't have good tools, reliable tools, and that includes computer systems, how can we ever be productive enough to pay off all this debt? And the answer is we can't. Some very short-sighted thinking has dominated national political agenda for far too long. Now, up in New England, 2 more states are starting to look at passing laws mandating GMO labeling. Rhode Island and New Hampshire. Go New Hampshire. Go Granite State. And they're saying the public does have a right to know. And, of course, the usual industry lobbyists are up there saying, this is going to cost huge amounts of money. The people, it doesn't really know. It's perfectly safe, blah, 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 blah. And I'm sure that Monsanto is going to do in Rhode Island and New Hampshire what they did in California. They're going to go to all the media outlets and say, if you do not argue against GMO labeling, we will pull all of our advertising off your media outlet. And the media outlets will cave again. Because they're in business to make money, not to inform the public. And this tells you they know GMOs are a problem. They won't even serve GMO at the Monsanto company cafeterias. If they thought GMOs were actually beneficial, they'd spend the money to label it contains more GMO than the other guy's product. We have 5 times the GMO of this brand over here. But they know there's a problem. They know that you know there's a problem. They know that you want to avoid GMOs, and they're going to take that freedom of choice away from you. You will eat your Soylent Green, and you will like it, because America has become a fascist economic dictatorship. And what the corporations want controls everything, and what you want is just irrelevant. And if they make you sick with their GMOs, or for that matter, their vaccines or anything like that, that's good for the economy, because then you have to spend money to go to the doctor. You have to spend money to go to the hospital. That's good for the economy. And that kind of thinking breaks down when you realize that most Americans don't have the money to go to the doctor or the hospital anymore. Again, very short-sighted thinking. Nobody's maintaining the overview of what's best for the nation as a whole. And if there's one function the president is supposed to do, is maintain that overview of what's best for the nation as a whole. And we haven't had a president capable of doing that for decades. All right, we're going to take a break here for our top of the hour news and commercials, and we'll be back with hour number 3 after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And before we take the phone call, who's been waiting very, very patiently, I'm looking at Fox News. We're still, 54 minutes away from when they can start actually reporting results of the New Hampshire primary. And Fox News is just playing all these games with the exit polls. They're not saying who anybody voted for, but they're coming up with things like 40% of Democratic voters would be okay with Hillary as the nominee. And 80% would be okay with Sanders as the nominee, and obviously the numbers don't really line up. They're just trying to generate something out of the numbers that doesn't violate the rules about actually saying who's winning and losing. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call. Joseph in Oklahoma. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
I'm doing great.
Having a good one. Yes, I wanted to say about. I wanted to talk about the state of our economy. You could probably disagree with me or not, but I think this probably is fascistic. But I think we're in an economic apartheid, in a way.
Yeah, I could see where you could see that from the wealth inequality.
Well, not only that, but it really doesn't matter who you are in this economy. If you have the money, then you can get anything. If you don't, then you're SOL. You know, and you know, you could almost see it in like the way the manufacturing is, or it used to be, or even the way the fast food industry is. I mean, you have people throwing out food at the end of every day, just throwing it away. And then you ask them, well, why don't you just give it away? And it's like, oh, because people haven't paid for it yet. And it's kind of mind-boggling. It is.
Over in Europe, they're starting to pass laws saying that restaurants and supermarkets can't throw food away anymore. They have to make it available for the homeless and hungry. I think we need that sort of thing here in the United States right now. Claire and I are involved in the homeless and hungry problem here on Oahu, and it's pretty bad, and it's getting worse.
Yeah, and I think that's why you also see the way the West is trying to subvert the other, I guess the resource-rich countries of the world. Because I guess they can't stand that these people yes, they might be, I guess we can say, poor in a way that they don't have a lot of paper dollars, but they're rich when you talk about resources. I mean, they can just walk out in their own backyard in many of these places and find food, find dry resources, and, you know, everything is there for them.
Yeah, these are independent people. They're not placed into a state of mandated enforced dependency in order for them to be controlled. But ultimately, if you think about it, all fascism is economic apartheid, where the people have got the money and they think that the universe is supposed to be set up so that the wealth all flows to them, and they truly believe they're meant to have all the wealth of the world. It's written into their religion. They believe wealth is the sign of the elect. And on the other side, of course, you have the socialists who think that everybody has an equal share to life's blessings. And, you know, so those are basically the two positions. Everything else is just kind of a relabeling. Okay?
Yeah. Also, I have one more question, and then I'll hang up. Do you think that all these vaccinations of, like, Africa and then Latin America and then some parts of Asia, do you think that's also to reduce the indigenous populations there?
Oh, absolutely. They've been caught doing it. They've absolutely been caught doing that. Using these vaccination, we're going to give you free vaccines, and then all of a sudden the women in those areas find themselves unable to reproduce.
So it's almost like the smallpox, in a way, in North America, but just like 21st century.
Well, we don't know if it's being done in the United States. We're talking third world nations where they've been caught doing this over in Africa. And here in the United States, I'm far more concerned about the epicite gene having broken into the wild and contaminating corn, because there has been a sharp drop in birth rates here in the United States of America, most of it among the Hispanic community, which are the highest per capita consumers of corn products.
And that's what I mean. Do you think, like, in those third world or those resource-rich nations, they're just giving them all these vaccines as a fast track? So they, like you said,
population reduction. It all goes back to National Security Study Memorandum 200, and I actually did a video about this called "What Are They Thinking?" And I guess it's time to reprise that to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com, because it will explain a lot of this.
Okay, Mike, I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now then, as you know, there has been a big issue regarding Ted Cruz's eligibility to be President of the United States of America because of the clause in the Constitution requiring the President to be a natural-born U.S. citizen. And Ted Cruz has been out there saying, I'm a U.S. citizen. This natural-born doesn't mean anything. It's not actually defined in the Constitution. The counter-argument, of course, is it didn't need to be defined in the Constitution. It was already defined in other legal works of the day. And if natural-born didn't really mean born in this country, it wouldn't have been added there. The natural-born requirement for the presidency was added to the Constitution by Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, a guy by the name of Jay, and he basically wrote down, we want to make sure that the military might of the United States is under the control of somebody born inside the country, on American land. And they've been fighting this back and forth, but there's a little bit of a new wrinkle, because Ted Cruz and his supporters are out there saying that even though he was born in Canada, he was a U.S. citizen because his mother was an American citizen. He was a dual citizen, and he came to the United States, and he renounced his Canadian citizenship, and that's what made him eligible to be in the Senate. And if they just ignore this whole natural-born thing, he's eligible to be president. But it turns out there's a little bit of a wrinkle, because apparently, in this latest report from Carl Denninger in the Market Ticker, in 1970 in Canada, when Ted Cruz was born, Canada did not recognize dual nationality. Ted Cruz was a Canadian citizen by virtue of his birth in Canada. He was not a U.S. citizen at birth. Game, set, and match. And it is very alarming to me that Ted Cruz and his supporters want to ignore the Constitution so that he can run for the White House, which means were he to win, he would ignore the Constitution as president. And we've already had way too many presidents who are ignoring the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So, getting on back to the economy, we were talking about women preferring to shop at Goodwill rather than Sears, value for money and everything. Up in Toronto, their Goodwill store has just filed for bankruptcy. Goodwill International is distancing themselves and saying Goodwill Toronto is no longer allowed to use the name Goodwill. So when the Goodwill stores aren't making it, you know the economy's in trouble. Absolutely. Now, down in Las Vegas, as you know, Sheldon Adelson recently bought Nevada's largest newspaper, the Las Vegas Review-Journal. And it was sort of bought very quietly. They tried to hide who was buying it. But it eventually came out, and then the Review-Journal came out and said it's a new age of transparency and legitimacy and credibility. And they're having to pull back on that because apparently Sheldon Adelson is very tightly controlling the newspaper in terms of what they write, when they write it. He's exerting an iron-fisted control over editorial policy and direction. And it's one more time, when these people buy media that isn't making any money, they're buying the media to control what the public sees, hears, and reads. And that's what's going on there. Okay, let's see. They're still on Fox News going out the exit polls. What is your highest concern in the candidate? And not too surprisingly, honesty and trustworthiness is leading that, which is going to work against Hillary because she is seen as untrustworthy and dishonest. We're going to be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to be talking about science and health here. Now, out here in Hawaii, down on the Big Island, and for those of you not familiar with the local slang, and we've discovered when we talk to people on the mainland, we say the Big Island, they go, what? And the reason for that is simple. The entire state is called Hawaii, but the largest island is also called Hawaii. So locals just call it the Big Island to distinguish it from the state as a whole. So down on the Big Island, the government of Hawaii has declared a dengue fever state of emergency. Now, as the weather gets a little bit cooler, the mosquitoes are not as much of a problem, although a couple of weeks ago, Claire and I were visiting family on the Big Island, and I remember the mosquitoes were kind of hovering around me. I guess I taste good or something. Now, I did some research, and we've all heard dengue fever, horrible, and it can be, but only for about 5% of the people who get dengue fever. Only about 5% of the people who come down with dengue fever are serious enough to warrant going to the doctor in the hospital. I was rather amazed to find out 75% of the people who get dengue fever never show any symptoms at all and don't know they have it, although obviously they can pass it to other mosquitoes who bite them. For the other 20%, kind of feels like a mild flu. Now, if you really think about it, an ideal infecting agent, pathogen, doesn't want to make you sick, doesn't want to kill you, because then its opportunities to reproduce are reduced. And over time, diseases tend to evolve to less serious situations. Measles, when it first appeared, was a slate wiper. Now it's a childhood inconvenience. Now, the mosquito that carries dengue fever also carries Zika. We have one confirmed case here in Hawaii, which they are insisting came from outside the state, but that's what they said when dengue first showed up here as well. A lot of people are still very concerned about what's going on with Zika. Is it really a big threat? Is it really tied in with the Brazilian babies suffering from microcephaly? And everybody's pointing fingers everywhere else. Brazilian scientists are saying that this surge in these microcephalic babies followed a mandated vaccination program for pregnant women of the Tdap vaccine. Now, even the World Health Organization is saying we don't know there's a link from Zika to microcephaly, but we're going to go with that right now. So pay no attention to any other claims about what's going on. Now, Zika's been around for 70 years. It's never previously produced microcephalic babies. There are now 3,100 women in Colombia who have Zika. They're infected, but there have been no cases of brain-deformed babies down there. Now, another theory that's being thrown out there has to do with this attempt to create a genetically modified mosquito of the same species that carries Zika and dengue and release it into the wild of Brazil so that it would breed with the natural variety and they would produce offspring that would die before they could reproduce. And the concern is, one theory is that the genetic modification altered the Zika virus. And that's the cause of microcephaly. Maybe. But we know that corporate science is all about protecting itself. So we're not really too sure. Another point of view coming out from Matrix Bob at WordPress is that Zika is being marketed as a new scare to sell more pharmaceutical products like the bird flu and the swine flu. Remember back in 2009, the when pigs fly flu? And we called it that because the flu contained elements of human, avian, and porcine flu DNA. And we actually found a document from the CDC showing that years before they were experimenting on making this. And in 2009, they came out with this big scare, it's going to erase half the population by Tamiflu. The World Health Organization actually lowered the threshold of how many cases had to exist to declare it a pandemic, so that they could say, it's a pandemic by Tamiflu. And in the end, it turned out that the 2009 swine flu was less serious than the normal seasonal flu. And Roche Pharmaceuticals made a huge amount of money. And then later on, research done in Great Britain and reported by BBC found that Tamiflu was no more effective against the flu than over-the-counter acetaminophen. And so there is reason to wonder if the scare talk about Zika is just another sales campaign. Using fear to get your money here. Story coming out of the New York Times blogs. It turns out the whooping cough booster shot may only offer short-term protection. We have been talking for a long time about all these cases where there will be a campaign to vaccinate the kids against measles, mumps, whooping cough, and then all of a sudden there's an epidemic in the vaccinated population. And scientists are finally starting to come up there and say, well, these things really aren't as good. Scientists looked at 1,200 pertussis cases among children who had had the vaccine. And the study, which was reported in Pediatrics, found out that when these children got the Tdap booster, and Tdap is the one that is suspected by Brazilian scientists of contributing to microcephaly, it was only 69% effective after 1 year, and then dropped to 9% 2 to 3 years later. It's not effective. It's just a big moneymaker. Now, there's a big scandal coming out of Japan because, as you know, following numerous reports of permanent harm suffered by young women who were given the Gardasil vaccine, Japan stopped it, said, we got to look at this. And now Dr. Sin-Hang Lee has discovered that at a public hearing on HPV vaccine held in Tokyo, Japan back in 2014, members of the Global Advisory Committee on Vaccine Safety, the World Health Organization, the CDC, and other scientific professionals deliberately set out to mislead Japanese authorities regarding the safety of Gardasil and Cervarix, which were being promoted and sold at that time. In other words, they lied. Here, this is safe. Buy it, pump it into your kids. Now, over in Indiana, a bill to force vaccinations for all hospital workers has passed the Indiana Senate unanimously, Senate Bill 162. And it's probably not much of a surprise because Eli Lilly is based in Indianapolis and is a dominant economic force in Indiana. Can't annoy them. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about how they just passed a law in Indiana unanimously in the Senate. All hospital workers have to be vaccinated. And I pointed out how Eli Lilly is headquartered in Indianapolis. And the largest business in the state of Indiana, and a Fortune 50 not 550 company is Anthem, which is a health conglomerate. So anyone daring to suggest that government-recommended drugs may be bad is up for a fight. Now, you remember back after Sandy Hook when some people in Connecticut were using their state's equivalent of the Freedom of Information Act to get Adam Lanza's medical records to see if he was on prescription antidepressants or any other kind of psychiatric medication at the time because of the long documented record of antidepressants triggering mass violence and suicide. And there was this video made of the meeting where an attorney from the state medical examiner's office, Patrick Quanachet, came on down and he literally said, look, even if in this one case the medicine triggered the violent behavior, that's not something Americans need to know because then they won't take their doctor-recommended medications. And when you consider how many pharmaceutical companies are in Connecticut, you begin to understand why he was so nervous about that. Here in Hawaii, the bill to mandate vaccinations got voted down. Dead on arrival here. Now, there's a story coming out of ORAS talking about a study published in the journal Health Affairs, basically looking at vaccinations from the economic point of view, saying that vaccinations are an excellent financial investment. For every $1 spent, you will earn $44. This was a study done by Johns Hopkins in 94 countries around the world. Vaccination is not about health, it's about profits and big business. Another story, this one coming out of Natural News. Somebody actually leaked email out of one of the major pharmaceutical corporations in which the CEO is openly saying we're raising the price from $1,700 per bottle, that's the price that goes to the pharmacy, to $75,000. That will be a very handsome investment for all of us. The medical industrial complex is not about health. It's about selling product. They need you to be chronically ill. If all Americans were healthy, the whole system would collapse. They need you to be sick. That's why they're not concerned about toxic food additives or harmful effects of GMO or vaccines. They'll sell you medicine you don't need. That medicine makes you sick. Then they got you. You got to buy more medicine to deal with the side effects of the first one. Then you got to buy a third medicine to deal with the side effects of the second one. I'm starting to wonder just which one is worse, big pharmaceutical drugs or the street drugs out there on the corner. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab a phone call here. Matthias in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Great show. I've been listening to you every day for a long time, and something just crystallized yesterday. I just realized that our governments are actual crime boss families. It really is. They really are. Like, the president is a mafia don, and all the government officials are all like the muscle of this criminal organization, and it explains everything. That's why everything they're doing is illegal and against us.
Well, yeah. I mean, we know that our government is involved in the smuggling of illegal drugs. That's been going on at least back toward Vietnam days. Yeah, government is acting like an organized crime outfit, and they'll wrap themselves in a flag and say, this is the way life is supposed to be. But people are waking up and realizing that government is all about cronyism and corruption and extracting wealth from the masses to put in their own pockets.
Yeah, and I think they actually are not just acting like it. They very literally really are. It just hit me. They really are organized mafia families that have taken over our government.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that I'll just go back to listening to your show, but it just hit me that everything that you've been explaining, it all points to that.
Well, you know, the line between government and the mafia has been blurred for a very long time. I mean, even going back to Cuba, the CIA was doing business with the mafia, trying to get Castro, and later on where there was some involvement with them over John F. Kennedy. I mean, politics is a practical profession. You go to the people who can get you what you want. And again, we know the CIA has been tangled up in drug running, Iran-Contra, Vietnam. And, it's kind of hard to draw a line and say this is the law-abiding government and this is organized crime. There's a great deal of overlap. They do act like the mafia wrapped in a flag.
Right, and this is why Hillary is not in jail, and why Obama's not in jail. It's like, the crime family is deciding who in the crime family should go to jail.
Yeah, but at the point where the American people begin to recognize that government is a criminal operation, they start to lose control. It's already happening. And, they may actually hit Hillary with a little bit of a wrist slap charge or something. I think they're starting to want her out of the race before the actual depths of all the criminality are really driven to the surface. Now, those of us in the independent media who've been following along what the Clintons have been doing for the last 20-odd years, we know what's going on here. But the vast majority of the American people, they're becoming suspicious about what these people in government are doing, but they don't know the details yet. And, at some point, the government is going to have to say, we have to slow down and back off, or we're going to lose all of our credibility and legitimacy with the public, and they're going to stop filling out the paperwork, they're going to stop putting the stickers on their car, they're going to stop, sending their children off to die in our wars, and at that point, the government ceases to function. Because if the government gives out an order and nobody's going to listen and obey, that's a government that just can't function any longer. That's exactly what happened to the Soviet Union.
Right. My girlfriend lived through the collapse of the Soviet Union, and you're exactly right when you say that for 6 months or so, we have to take care of ourselves.
Yes.
She was explaining that, she fed her family by volunteering at a soup kitchen all day and then taking half a cup of soup home for her and her mother. And, it's exactly like you say. For 6 months, there's no outside food supplies. There's nothing outside. It actually was a scary experience. It was just a lot of criminal gangs running the street corners. And
oh, yeah, some of those Russian gangs are really serious business. But, yeah, we're going to have to go through the same thing here. And we'll come out the other side with a much better nation that actually does work for the nation and the people rather than just as an excuse to plunder us all for the money junkies. Anyway, listen, Matthias, thank you very much. I'm going to let you go here. Over on WhatReallyHappened.com, one of our readers just posted a very interesting video. As you know, there's been a lot of Muslim bashing and propaganda to get us to hate the Muslims and love the Israel and the rest of it. And filmmakers Sasha Harland and Alexander Spoor took a Bible and replaced the cover with one from the Quran. And then they started reading passages from the Bible to people about violence. And of course everybody said, Islam is such a violent religion. Well, this is actually a Bible. Oh, well, that makes it okay. And it's kind of an interesting video to watch because people have bought into this propaganda. And remember, the Nazis did the same thing to the Jews. They needed a group to put the 2-minute hate on in order to control the people. And the U.S. government is doing it with the Muslims. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program on this Tuesday, and we are obviously about 12 minutes away, I think, from starting to get official results from the New Hampshire primary. Are they going to try and blatantly steal it right before our eyes, or can we back them down with our awareness of election fraud? Now then, there's a very disturbing story that we just put up at WhatReallyHappened.com. And not too long ago, we were reporting on all these holistic doctors down in Florida who were being murdered. And everybody was trying to find out what the heck was going on. And some just disappeared, some were just very obviously killed. And it turns out, according to this article, the thing that connects all of these dead scientists together is they were working on the discovery that Negalase enzyme protein is being added to vaccines which are administered to humans. Now, Negalase is what prevents vitamin D from being produced inside your own body. And vitamin D is the body's main natural defense against cancer. The reality is, if you get cancer, there's a 1 in 4 chance it's just going to go away all by itself. Obviously, that's not good for the cancer industry. And that's why their attitude is, well, we don't know which 25% is going to be. We're going to treat everybody with radiation and chemotherapy and, run up the hospital bills. And if they're putting this in all the vaccines so that we can't fight off cancer, so that they can sell us a cancer treatment, nobody wants a cure. And when you look at how much money is involved here, yeah, that's a motive to kill off a bunch of scientists. It is very, very ugly. Now, I'm seeing more articles start to surface over this recent revelation that Canada in 1970, when Ted Cruz was born, did not recognize dual citizenship. And they're saying basically for Cruz to come to the United States and renounce his citizenship, there has to be a paired document, a record of a foreign birth, which would be the equivalent of a birth certificate. He may not have that, which means he wasn't even eligible to serve in the U.S. Senate. I've got another email here saying that basically in 1970, if you were born a Canadian, it also made you a British subject. Canada was under the Queen's mandate until 1982. This just gets more and more interesting all the time. All right, I'm going to be adding all of this to my article on Natural Born and get it on out there, but I think that's one of the reasons why Cruz is in decline. Very clearly, he and his supporters have no respect for the Constitution, and if they are not going to respect the Constitution, no way should he be president. Let's talk about computers a little bit. Apparently, there's another bug that has been discovered inside the Java system. Oracle is having to release yet another patch for Windows. And apparently, if you visit a compromised website before you put in Java 6, 7, or 8, it hands the attacker complete control over your PC. It's just wide, wide open. Part of the problem is, of course, that the corporatization of software has made it hideously complicated. Nobody can actually keep it all in their head, figure out what's going on. It's compartmentalized and departmentalized, and it reflects the confusion of the corporate structure that produced it. But I'll tell you what's really going to end all of this computer snooping. First of all, reasserting the Fourth Amendment on the NSA, FBI, CIA, police departments is part of the problem. Now, I'm not normally in favor of the death penalty, but if you look at how much damage is being caused to the American economy by cyber criminals, I think we ought to just take the first one that we can catch and prove is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt and crucify them live on national TV. If they're in reasonable health, it's going to take them a week to die. And I think if you do that just once, probably a lot of these cyber criminals are going to think, there's something else that we could do for a living. But again, I want to hammer home the point that we have been assured that the NSA is totally watching all of the internet to find the terrorists and the evil people. They're not finding any, so we may assume they have a lot of free time on their hands. Why are they not going after the hackers and the cyber criminals? Now, according to Kaspersky, at least one of the major hacker groups out there, the Equation Group, is the NSA. And this gets back to that phone call we just got. Is it a government or is it an organized crime operation? And we may come to the conclusion that all government above the level of the county is an organized crime operation. So, let's see. Over product liability and everything. The federal government is now up in arms over the Fiat Chrysler SUVs and cars. They have a fancy electronic gear shift system. You don't get a stick, you get buttons. And apparently the way it's designed, it's so confusing. Drivers are getting out of their SUVs and cars with the engine still running and still in gear. The instant they take their foot off the brake, the car takes off and they're getting into accidents. And that's another reason to avoid all this whiz-bang high technology and go back to what's simple and elegant, easy to understand, and works. We've made our devices too complicated. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love computers. I don't need one in my coffee pot. I don't even really need one in my car. And especially when we look at how anything with a computer in it can be hijacked and turned against you. I have lots of computers in my work. In my regular private life, I'm turning into a Luddite. I don't have computers in my coffee pot. I don't have a computer in my toaster. I don't have a computer in my stove. I want simple, elegant, will work. I can fix it myself. I think that's going to be I think there's going to be a backlash against this over-gadgetization. It's already happening, and I think that's one of the reasons why some of the purveyors of things like the iWatch and the proposed iRing, they're not selling anymore. People are gadgeted out. You know, in our smartphones, we want a phone that'll make a phone call, email, web browsing, a few other things. We don't need all the rest of it. And I have to be very honest, my wife's current smartphone, which is an Android, it's very confusing for her to use. And she's not a dummy. She's a very smart person. But it's just too many buttons, too many switches, too many things to work with. I think we need to go back to simple and elegant and works in order that we can be more productive. And that also applies to, well, again, getting back to Windows 10. It's much more needlessly obfuscated than earlier versions of Windows. I can understand why a lot of people are abandoning Microsoft Office and going with some of the open source versions like OpenOffice. I don't need all that stuff that Word does. I just want to be able to type, spell check, format, and print. That's it. I don't need all the rest of that stuff. I think we're probably going to see people start to turn away from the latest state-of-the-art as a fashion statement, because it's just not worth it. We can't afford it anymore in this economy. We can't afford to always be on the cutting edge of technology, especially when it fails as often as it does, when it turns out to be full of software bugs that we've been drafted as unpaid quality assurance workers for all these companies, where they'll fire their own QA staff, they'll put out a faulty product, and they'll just wait for us to figure out what's wrong and get back to them. And even then, they won't answer us. I never did get an answer regarding the inability of 3D Studio Max to install on Windows 7. And they wonder why we're in economic decline. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices. We're going to be watching the New Hampshire results tonight. Will they steal it or won't they? We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.